Hello, how are you today? Today it's been a pretty cold night so far. It's been raining all over the week and past week as well. But I also came across something interesting while I was scrolling down on Instagram. There was a girl talking about how we tend to get trendy things that sometimes are like nonsense, following up beauty standards when we actually have different type of beauty, but a large variety of it. It's not only about ethnicity, it's also about different facial features, but also a raw uniqueness. I've been adding all the last thing so far. But there was one comment that said, let's just ugly mats. What if we just put ugly as trendy? If we put this type of lack of beauty on us as something desirable, that will be like changing the game. What if we just ugly mats, as the comment said, becoming whatever we want, trendy by this time, liking things we find ugly, using things we find ugly, and putting as a standard as the ugliest thing out there. This led me to trying to find out more about ugliness. I know I mentioned this topic in a previous video, but I want to maximize the concept a bit. For me, each extreme is bad, but I think that ugliness haven't had this tendency in this modern era, so it will be really interesting. What I found was Aesthetics of Ugliness, a critical translation by Karl Rosenkranz, edited and translated by Andre and Widrich. So let's see how it goes. An aesthetics of ugliness, and why not? Aesthetics has become the collective name for a large group of concepts, which is in turn divisible into three particular classes. The first has to do with the idea of beauty, the second with the notion of its production, that is to say, art, the third with the system of the arts, with the representation of the idea of beauty through art in a specific medium. That also means constant context or environment or related. But if the idea of beauty is to be considered, an investigation of ugliness is inseparable from it. Capture this, beauty is to be considered. We tend to like being perceived as beauty as desirable because we want to be seen. We want people to keep eyes on us. But some other people, they don't like the focus on themselves, so they tend to hide. They tend to curve their posture, putting more clothes on, and related. But deep dive, we all have craved attention at least once in our life. So one way in this society to get that is through beauty. But if the idea of beauty is to be considered, the concept of ugliness, of negative beauty, thus is a part of aesthetics. There is no science to which it could be assigned. And so it is right to speak of the aesthetics of ugliness. No one is amazed if biology also concerns itself with the concept of illness, ethics with that of evil, legal science with injustice, or theology with the concept of sin. To say the theory of ugliness would fail to bring out so clearly the scientific genealogy of the word. As for the name, the handling of the subject itself would be to justify it. We also talk about ugliness. Ugliness itself is an aesthetic for sure. So we tend to talk about aesthetics, about something that is pretty, something that is generally accepted, something that is appealing to the eye. But we have aesthetics of everything. And there's also one for ugliness. So ugliness is also part of aesthetics itself. There's the route to develop the concept of the ugly through a midpoint between that of the beautiful and that of the comical. From its first beginnings to the fullness, it gives itself in the form of the satanic. In a way, they reveal the cosmos of ugliness from its first chaotic patches of fog, from shapelessness and asymmetry to its most intense formations in the endless multiplicity of these organizations of beauty that is called caricature. So notice when we see caricatures, the artist tends to prioritize those physical attributions, sometimes logical attributions are related to enlighten them the most. It turns out to make those more obvious. So it is the opposite, where other types of art they highlight the beauty. They focus on the beautiful aspect of the person, for example, or of the environment. Beautiful sunset, beautiful hair, etc. But when we're talking about this area, sub area of art, we want to highlight what is mostly noticed as ugly, as outrageous, as something like absurd, and so on. So I find this shapelessness and asymmetry something interesting in this area. Formlessness, incorrectness, and the deformity of disfiguration are the distinct levels of this self consistent series of metamorphoses. The attempt has been made to show how ugliness has its positive presupposition in beauty, which it distorts to create the mean instead of the sublime, the repulsive instead of the pleasant, and instead of the ideal caricature, the caricature. I really love this repulsive versus pleasant. When we're talking about a metamorphosis, we're talking about Frank Kafka. I every time I read Metamorphosis or I hear it or I see it somewhere else, I'm just like Frank Kafka. He knew he could see his thing entirely. He did. All the arts and all the epochs of art among the most diverse peoples are invoked to clarify the development of the concepts using opposite examples, which should also provide raw materials and reference points for future students of this difficult province of aesthetics. Because ugliness, since it isn't the thing that is the most desirable thing tends to go into a second place, isn't it? So I would love to have this like accepted of ugliness whenever there's like some kind of design course, something that has to do a lot with visuals. To also have that in mind. You were talking about and studying aesthetics of beauty, whatever you also study aesthetics of ugliness. We should also do that, don't you think? Through this work, whose imperfections people know best, and these tests, they were hoping to fill a gap that has until now been all too tangible. For the concept of ugliness has until now been handled only in a fragmentary and incidental fashion, or else with great generality, which risks considering the subject using very one sided definition, as we were mentioning before. What just on a superficial look of it. This is literally a big part of our daily life. Is when we try an apple and we say like I like it or not. It's sweet, it's bitter, whatever. When we see something immediately our brains are going to say like pretty, not pretty. I mean not pretty, but perhaps not that ugly. That's something that we do every day. It's the wine is that in it itself. Doesn't make any sense, right? So the well-meaning reader who really seeks self-instruction may grant all this. That will be joined up. Yet may still ask, should such an unpleasant, disgusting object be so thoroughly investigated? Undoubtedly, for science has in recent times touched of this problem again and again and again, and it requires a resolution. Naturally, our author did not wish to advance a claim to having accomplished this. It is satisfied, but perhaps in other areas it is granted that we need to make some kind of a step forward and go deeper into this subject, don't you think? The individual may think thus and set aside the science of ugliness unread. Science itself, however, follows only its own necessity. It must go forward. So, for example, if we are also having this area of looking for aesthetics, but beauty aesthetics, people need to add that word beauty aesthetics, but they don't. They put it as general aesthetics. Other investigations may follow other people, what people are commenting and looking after the most. They aren't going to spend time investigating and money researching on things that aren't going to be seen for the public. That doesn't translate in views, that doesn't translate in sites, that doesn't translate in money returning back to the labs or to the schools, institutions, etc. So that is another reason. Charles Fourier, under the rubric of the division of labor, defined one type that he called the travaux of development. Sorry if I mispronounced that is in another language. That means works of devotion, to which no one is predisposed by nature, but which men do out of resignation, because they recognize their necessity for the common good. The attempt to satisfy such a duty is made here as well. But is this business really so terrifying to practice? Does it not also contain good points? Thus, not a positive content also lied in hiding for the philosopher, for the artist, for ugliness. It can only be graphed as the midpoint between beauty and the comical. The comical is impossible without an ingredient of ugliness, which it dissolves and reforms in the freedom of beauty. This sharing and universal consequence of our investigation will excuse the undoubted pain of some sections. So, for thinking more, we can go through examples, but it is obvious that for all the aestheticians, we have various ones such as Winkelmann, Lessing, Kant, Jean Paul, Hegel, and others that recommend the sparing use of examples. And you also have some names if you want to dig deeper in other perspective. But on the material accumulated on these texts for this purpose, they also made through a little half and also consider different choices of examples that might be encountered in the following. But the way they handle material in these texts might be seen old-fashioned and perhaps too precise. Modern writers have invented for themselves a striking method of citation, namely to sprinkle their texts liberally with inverted commas. Where they find the citation or citation remains mysterious. It is allowed for them to add a name, but it seems to them that they also need to add the name of a book. So this test mostly opens the door to this wide discussion. And let me tell you, it does it in a great way. And I wanted to explain to you how this text follows. It is more fluid, and that's why I picked it. But what I also like about it is that the author starts to putting himself in the text, pointing out now personal opinions and perspectives as the one that I just mentioned before about the citations. So I really like it. So this is relatable and an easy reading for the general public. Only through the nature of the material does this accessibility to have like less limitations. And I also can tell you the following, that I really appreciate this kind of text because it's just like a more fluid type of reading, but also if you were talking with someone. That's why I think one of the reasons the author encoded itself on the test is just for to open the game and to talk a bit more fluent for you to not feel overwhelmed. So when we talk about ugliness, like yeah, let's put it back into track. Let's put it as something trendy. Perhaps in that way we can make institutions to actually teach, have like a subject of it. Also to have to open the door to, hey, what if we reconsider what's beautiful and what's not? What if we also search the aesthetics of ugliness, of being ugly, of perceiving ugly? I would love that because that is also something that needs to be studied. We cannot just ignore something that we use every single day. Now we're going to classify people categorize people and also things around environments and others based on this. What there is also a paper on a magazine, Dazed Digital, that talks about this. It is called "Why Do We Fear Ugliness from What Can and What Can We Learn from It?" It is by Rosa Rahimi. While we discuss beauty freely and often, ugliness is really rarely spoken about. Something about the word feels taboo. Yet, underlying the products were sold to look beautiful, and the rituals were advised to follow, are an effort to stay far away from that might be considered as ugly. It's the unspoken other side of living in a world with beauty standards. So they implore us to think about what we have learned about ugliness throughout our life and the history these ideas are stepped in. TikTok videos about golden face ratios are in objective scientific findings. They have roots in pseudoscientific and often discriminatory theories. So why writing about ugliness? And what she said is that, or also the person that was added to this valuable test, they come to a point that the actual and more crucial question is who is not beautiful? And that resonated so much in my mind. Like, who isn't beautiful? We all have part or pieces in ourselves that can be considered beautiful and also that can be considered ugly. So, who isn't beautiful? And I also will add the following: who is not ugly? And who will never be beautiful? Because our systems are built to keep them outside. And that is also true. So, the fourth one, and who will never be ugly? So, tell me, what do you think about all these? And do you want me to continue talking about this? Because I think this is an awesome topic. This is a pretty awesome topic. So basically, Rosa was interviewing Moshtari Hilal, and her writing process, she wrote a book about it. It's really beautiful. And she says the following at the end. If you ever been in a moment where you've had to deal with disability or sickness or death, you will realize that we have so much more depth and also generosity in our care for others and in our love. We are able to have that and to practice that. It's more the systematic scale that scares me, where people are not interested in engaging with this kind of self reflection or self exploration. And they just make it impossible. But just knowing from an individual perspective that it is possible, so we can possibility scale it up. That makes me hopeful. So thank you so much. Let me know. Do you think these four questions that I made at the end are valid? Do you think that also in these stats are valid? It was like two for the stats, two for me. Do you think everyone who is not ugly and who is not pretty as well? Let me know. Have you ever encountered these questions in the past? And also, last but not least, Do you agree that we also need to have some type of subjects talking about the aesthetics of beauty and the aesthetics of ugliness? Likewise, let me know. Talk to you another time. Bye bye.